there shall be signs in the sun, and in the moon, and in the stars, and upon the earth distress of nations, with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring, men's hearts failing them for fear, and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth. For the powers of heaven shall be shaken. One man, one microphone, one mission, one message. True News, the only newscast reporting the countdown to the second coming of Jesus Christ. And now for the most powerful hour on radio, here is End Time Newsman, Rick Wiles.
This is True News, 1 hour of uncensored news, views, and commentary. Welcome to the program. I'm Rick Wiles. Today is Monday, June 23rd, 2014. I've been a watchman on the wall since April 1998 when God startled me with a vision of America on fire. Over the next several months, the Lord enlarged my understanding of that vision by telling me of things to come. During the summer of 98, the Holy Spirit told me about an economic crisis caused by the meltdown of derivatives. He talked to me about cyber warfare, food terrorism, nuclear suitcase bombs, Islamic jihad in American streets, and eventually a surprise attack and invasion of the United States. In the summer of 1999, 1 year later, I heard these words in my spirit as I prayed: judgment starts in America on September 11. I heard it so plainly and so loud in my spirit that I assumed it would happen immediately, September 11, 1999. But that date came and went, and there was no judgment. Likewise, September 11, 2000 came and went, and there was no judgment. On August 11, 2001, 30 days before September 11, I was driving through the square of Granbury, Texas. I received a call from a close friend who is very sensitive to the Lord. Her name is Leah. She said, "Rick, something very odd is happening to me today. Everywhere I go, there are alarm bells ringing, car alarms, burglar alarms, oven alarms. And in each situation, the people can't turn off the alarms. They just keep ringing. And the Lord said to call you and say, the alarms are ringing, and this time they will not be turned off." Well, you know what happened 30 days later. The Twin Towers fell. I was not surprised. I was shocked and dismayed, but not surprised. I came to understand that the things the Lord showed me in that vision would not happen suddenly, all at one time, but happen gradually over many years. Well, last Thursday, Bible prophecy teacher John Shurey was here as my guest, and he told us a story about how the Lord led him out into the desert earlier this year after midnight and revealed something to him about America that he saw in the 1985 book by David Wilkerson, Set the Trumpet to Thy Mouth. John didn't know the book was in his coat pocket, but the Holy Spirit prompted him to look into his pocket. And then the page that he found was David Wilkerson giving us a clue when this judgment would come upon America. Now, this is what David Wilkerson wrote in 1985. America is going to be destroyed by fire. Sudden destruction is coming, and few will escape unexpectedly. And in 1 hour, a hydrogen holocaust will engulf America, and this nation will be no more. God is going to judge America for its violence, its crimes, its backsliding, its murdering of millions of babies, its flaunting of homosexuality, its corruption, its drunkenness, its drug abuse, its form of godliness without power, its lukewarmness towards Christ, its rampant divorce and adultery, its lewd pornography and child molestations, its cheating, its robbings, its dirty movies, and its occult practices. In 1 hour, it will be over. Judgment is at the doors. Our days are numbered. The church is asleep. The congregations are at ease, and the shepherds slumber. He goes on to say that before this great Holocaust, there will be smaller Holocausts. The oil fields of the Middle East will be ablaze, and the smoke will rise night and day as a warning of great Holocaust yet to come. There will be bombs falling on oil fields, on shipping docks, on storage tanks. There will be panic among all oil producers and shippers and upon the nations dependent on that oil. Soon, an economic nightmare will explode into reality. The Great Holocaust follows an economic collapse in America. The enemy will make its move when we are weak and helpless. Now, John Shorey, and I love my brother John Shorey, he's interpreted that message from the Lord by using David Wilkerson's 1985 vision. This judgment on America will come, and that one of the signs will be the burning of the oil fields in the Middle East. And John interpreted that clue, the burning of the oil fields, as the first Gulf War, when Saddam Hussein set his oil fields on fire and the oil fields of Kuwait. I'm going to tell you, when John said it, something jumped in my spirit. I looked over at Chris Steinley. He was looking at me. We both felt it at the same time. And it is this. That's not the correct interpretation. That is not God was not referring to the burning of the oil wells in the first Gulf War. It is a sign of what is about to happen in the Middle East. Pay close attention to this Islamic uprising that's taking over Iraq, because it's going to spread. And eventually it will take Jordan and then Saudi Arabia. And I believe this is what the Lord wants us to know. When we see the oil fields of the Middle East burning in 2014 or maybe 2015, I don't know the dates. I know it could happen very quickly. It can literally happen in weeks or months because things are changing that fast. I believe the message is this. When those oil fields are on fire now, the judgment is coming on the United States quickly. There will be an economic collapse of the United States, and then in our weakness, there will be a land invasion of the United States. My friends, I'm telling you, as a watchman who's been doing this job for the Lord since 1998, we are now at the door of seeing these things fulfilled. Judgment is at hand. Be on guard. Watch for the signs of the oil fields catching on fire anytime, perhaps this summer or fall or next year, but it is at hand. I've got to take a break. I'll be back in a minute with my first guest.
Reporting the countdown to the second coming of Jesus Christ, you're listening to TRU News, the End Time Newscast.
This is Max McLean. Why did Jesus have to be born in a manger? Listen to the Bible from Luke 2. In those days, Caesar Augustus issued a decree that a census should be taken of the entire Roman world, and everyone went to his own town to register. So Joseph went up from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to Bethlehem, the town of David, because he belonged to the house and line of David. He went there to register with Mary, who was pledged to be married to him and was expecting a child. While they were there, the time came for the baby to be born, and she gave birth to her firstborn, a son. She wrapped him in cloths and placed him in a manger, because there was no room for them in the inn. From Luke 2, listen to the Bible. It's great for the soul.
The Bible says that faith comes by hearing. Hear more at radiobible.org.
This is TRU News, your alternative source for global news, analysis, and commentary. TRU News is a listener-supported international newscast on the air over 15 years. This is the final week of June, and we humbly ask our audience around the world to do something this week to show your support for our work. Donating online is quick and easy. TRUnews.com, TRUNEWS, TRUnews.com. PayPal users should enter support at TRUnews.com. Checks and money orders should be mailed to Post Office Box 690069, Vero Beach, Florida, 32969. And we sincerely appreciate every donation, regardless of size. They all add up at the end of the month to provide what we need to keep going the next month. Now, I didn't see the new Godzilla movie. I've been told by people who did see it, however, that the movie features a battle between Godzilla and another species of monsters called Mothra that emerged from cocoons underneath a Japanese nuclear power plant and inside an American nuclear storage facility. Their diet consists of eating nuclear material. In one scene, the monsters dine on a Russian nuclear-powered ballistic submarine in the Pacific Ocean. The monsters eat Hawaii and rampage their way across the American West by eating Las Vegas as they work their way toward San Francisco. I was told that these nuclear-eating monsters have special powers to emit electromagnetic pulse waves to darken the cities before they chow down and eat them. The U.S. military in the movie is powerless to stop the E.M.P. monsters and must rely on Godzilla, the giant lizard, to save humanity. As Hollywood presents the threat of an E.M.P. attack as sci-fi fantasy, my guest today is concerned about a real-life threat from EMPs. Dr. Peter Vincent Pry is on the telephone with some disturbing information about a recent Islamic terrorist attack on an electrical power system. Dr. Pry is Executive Director of the Task Force on National and Homeland Security, which is a congressional advisory board, and he is the author of the book Apocalypse Unknown, also the book Electric Armageddon. Dr. Pry, welcome back to True News.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Should we be concerned about flying EMP monsters?
In the form of nuclear ballistic missiles, yes.
Okay, all right. I didn't see the Godzilla movie, but I was told that the EMP is in that movie. On a serious note, what happened in the Middle East regarding this electrical power system?
About Godzilla, I read a movie review of it. I didn't see the movie either. Mm-hmm. But the review pointed out, while they didn't think it was such a great movie, that it might actually do a public service by educating people about the EMP threat. And, unfortunately, I kind of have to concur. It seems people get most of their news by entertainment these days.
Yes.
On the Middle East, everybody has been so focused on ISIS, the radical group that has taken over large parts of Syria and Iraq. That an event in the middle of their march on Baghdad was ignored that happened in Yemen. Al-Qaeda on the Arabian Peninsula, which is one of the most aggressive and most threatening groups to the United States, and also one of the most imaginative and ingenious groups when it comes to coming up with ways to try to attack the United States, blacked out the Yemeni electric grid, the whole electric grid, on June 9th, which is the first time in history that a terrorist attack on a power grid has blacked out an entire country. I think that was a very significant milestone, and it was amazing to me that it did not make headlines. It didn't even make any mention in the Western press.
No, I didn't see it until you wrote about it. And I look at a lot of news, and I saw nothing about this until you brought it to our attention. What method did Al-Qaeda use to take down the power grid?
It wasn't a sophisticated attack. They used mortars and rocket-propelled grenade launchers to crash the high-tension power towers, which brought down the high-tension power lines. They apparently didn't attack EHV transformers, which could have resulted in a very protracted blackout. So I think, although I haven't seen subsequent reporting from the press, but I think the blackout lasted a few days, and they managed to managed to repair the damage and get it back up online. The important point, though, is that this shows that attacking power grids is on the terrorist agenda. They understand its usefulness as a weapon. They understand that this is a key societal vulnerability, and this is something that we need to be worried about coming to our shores. Worried about the United States being attacked this way. In addition to, my concern about EMP, I'm concerned about. We've been trying to educate the West, and the United States in particular, about the way the bad guys are planning to attack electric grids and our entire society, our critical infrastructures, which is by means of what is described, the Russians call it, an all-out cyber warfare operation. And in the United States, in the West, when we think of cyber warfare operations, we think of it as being limited to computer viruses and hacking. But this is not the way they would approach war by the Russians, the Chinese, North Koreans, the Iranians. They all basically have a similar doctrine. It's all derived from the Russian doctrine. It would start with computer viruses and hacking, but they basically throw in the kitchen sink. When you're trying to take down the electric grid and other critical infrastructures to attack the Achilles heel of another country, an all-out cyber warfare operation would start with computer viruses and hacking, but would also include physical sabotage, such as they did in Yemen, and such as apparently was happened in Metcalf at the Metcalf transformer substation back on April 16th of last year, outside San Jose, California. Where perpetrators unknown made a pretty sophisticated kinetic attack on the HV transformers outside San Jose.
That's what came to my mind when I first read your report about what happened in Yemen. I thought, well, this is very similar to what was taking place in California last year, where this mysterious group of gunmen repeatedly fired on a substation.
Right. And it would escalate all the way up to, it includes nuclear E.M.P. attack. A nuclear E.M.P. attack is considered part of a cyber warfare operation by the Russians, Chinese, Iranians, all North Koreans, all the bad guys. And so, we're seeing, it's almost like there's experiments going on with parts of these things, perhaps within our own country, at Metcalf, now in Yemen, where they've taken out a whole nation for the first time by means of blackout. And we know that all of our critical infrastructures, including the electric grid, are constantly under attack, probing attacks, by computer viruses and hacking all the time, every day. Eventually, when these guys eventually decide to try to take us down, our concern, is that they will do a combined arms operation of these things all at once.
So you're concerned about a multi-layered attack on the power system.
Exactly. This is what the Russians call, and they describe a all-out cyber warfare operation as a revolution in military affairs. It's sort of akin. A revolution in military affairs, in their definition, is a new method of warfare that is so potentially decisive that it can be transformative. It can be historically transformative in terms of enabling you to take down your adversary very decisively. And result in such a crushing victory that the other side is taken almost completely by surprise because they don't anticipate it. And one of the metaphors, one of the analogies for a revolution in military affairs is the Blitzkrieg in World War II. Where through a failure of strategic imagination, the Western allies were completely unprepared for this new style of warfare. They thought that World War II was going to be fought the way World War I was fought, in the trenches, that it would be a Sitzkrieg, using trenches and barbed wire and machine guns, and neither side would make much of an advantage, no decisive breakthroughs. But they did not anticipate, because they failure of a strategic imagination about what the new technology of tanks, more effective fighter aircraft, mobile infantry, mobile artillery, coordinated in a combined arms operation of what that could do. And the Nazis nearly conquered the world with that, conquering most of Western Europe in 40 days.
Dr. Pry, in 1999, I flew Colonel Stanislav Luna to Dallas-Fort Worth. I was living there at the time, and he came in and spent several days with me. We had private conversations, and then he spoke at a conference that we held in the Fort Worth area. And he told me, Colonel Lunov is the highest-ranking Russian spy, military spy ever to defect. He was the GRU spy whose responsibility was to hide nuclear suitcase bombs, or to find, I should say this, his responsibility was to find the locations where other Russian agents would hide nuclear suitcase bombs in the United States. And he told me in that private meeting that the Russian war strategy was designed to bring total shock to the United States. The goal was not to destroy the United States, but to bring the country into total shock that the people would be so demoralized that they would quickly surrender and the war would be over. So, an E.M.P. attack, a massive cyber attack, everything goes dark, total chaos. I mean, that would bring this country into chaos.
A small world. I count Stanislav Lunav as one of my friends. And I ran the hearings where we had him as a witness.
Did you really?
Yeah, in front of the House Armed Services Committee. In fact, I put together for the Congress a model based on Stan's descriptions of what a Russian nuclear suitcase bomb would look like. And it's been much. Indeed, it got me into the. Lunev is the one who deserves to be in the spy museum, but there's a photograph of me holding this mock-up of a suitcase nuke in the American Spy Museum today, and I'm featured there with famous actors who have played spies like Sean Connery and Steve McQueen and other people. So it's a little bit of flattering for me to be in the American Spy Museum surrounded by these actors. But
I'm going to have to visit the Spy Museum. It's in D.C., right?
Yeah, that's right, and
right.
International Spy Museum, and we actually went for a walk in the woods where he showed me, one of the locations that he had recommended for the GRU to pre-position a suitcase nuke. There were thousands of such sites, but they wouldn't have used all of them. That's the thing. I mean, they would have used a small fraction of them, and he wasn't the only one doing it. In his judgment, they actually followed through on that, and Lunev thinks that there are suitcase nukes still hidden in the United States, in preparation for the big one when the balloon finally goes up.
That's right. I remember asking him again. This is over 15 years ago. Asking him how the nuclear suitcase bombs were brought into the United States, and the two things I remember him saying is, number one, they used illegal immigrants to transport them across the Mexican border into the U.S., and he said the Russian spies would then execute the immigrants who carried out the assignment. Once they brought the bomb into the United States, they were eliminated. And the other way, he said, is that they were dropped in by parachute into the western states, into the desert areas of the western states. If that was going on in the 90s, can you imagine what's going on right now with the massive invasion over the border that the Obama administration is facilitating?
Yeah, there was we had a case, as a matter of fact, after Yemen. I can't remember, Nogales, where they found a bomb that was located next to a fuel tank that was running a transformer that was associated with a power plant near Nogales. And this is one of the big crossover points for illegal immigrants. Now they disarmed this thing, and so it didn't go off. It was a 50,000-gallon fuel tank, but it would have caused a large-scale regional blackout if that had happened. And it didn't. It was a more sophisticated thing that hardly could be described as vandalism. So. Again, it makes one wonder if this is an experiment, a test to see how vigilant we are, how non-vigilant we are, and what they possibly could get away with. Elizabeth Kreft with The Blaze wrote a good article on the Nogales incident that happened just a couple weeks ago. And this is following the Yemen blackout, which happened on June 9th. The point. You mentioned the Metcalf transformer incident. The last year, when we were in the middle of a nuclear crisis with North Korea, most severe nuclear crisis we ever had, because Kim Jong-un was threatening to destroy the United States with a nuclear missile strike. And while President Obama's public position was, well, they can't do that yet. They don't have the ability to reach the United States. Nonetheless, he was conducting B-2 bomber dry runs over the demilitarized zone, and sent a THAAD missile system to Guam and did other things to try to beef up the national missile defenses. Even while he was sort of denying the North Korean, not sort of overtly, publicly denying that North Korea could deliver on its nuclear missile threat. But in fact, they could in all likelihood, deliver on that nuclear missile threat because they demonstrated the capability to orbit a satellite, and they have demonstrated that they do have nuclear weapons. They've conducted at least three nuclear weapons tests that we know of. And in the midst of that nuclear crisis, it was not widely known or reported. I did write an article on this, too, which didn't get much attention. But the North Korean satellite, the KSM-3 satellite, was passing right over the United States in the midst of that nuclear crisis at the perfect altitude for doing an E.M.P. attack on the United States if it was disguised as a nuclear warhead. So they were I don't think it was a nuclear warhead, but they were demonstrating the capability to do that. This satellite had been orbited on a south polar orbit, so it would approach the United States from the south, which is our blind side. We don't have any ballistic missile early warning radars and no interceptors facing south. So every orbit, basically, the president had to make a decision on whether, even if he wanted to, he wouldn't have been able to shoot it down, not until it passed over the United States and passed over our national missile defenses, which are in the north. On the 16th, it passed right over the center of the country on, I think it was April 3rd, and that would have enabled them to put an E.M.P. field down over the whole country. And on April 16th, which was the very day of the attack on the Metcalf transformer substation in California, which potentially, the cascading consequences from that, if those guys, if that wasn't a dry run, and John Wellinghoff didn't think it was an all-out attempt to actually take it down, that it was a dry run, it was an experiment to just see what they could get away with. But if they had gone all out and destroyed those transformers, the cascading effects might have blacked out the whole western grid. The KSM-3 satellite on that very day was going over the Washington, D.C., New York City corridor, which is where we have a big concentration. It's one of the biggest concentrations of EHV transformers in the whole country. And had that been a warhead, and if it had gone out, it would have put a peak field down on those transformers and enabled them to take out the eastern grid. The eastern grid is the whole game because that's 75% of U.S. electricity is generated by the eastern grid, and that would be it for us. So, I think that the North Koreans were at least experimenting with whether they could execute this all-out cyber warfare operation, the nuclear part of it, and the kinetic part of it with the Metcalf thing. Most people don't realize it, but North Korea's got a strategic alliance. They've got a treaty alliance with Iran, and Iran has many terrorist groups already embedded in the United States. The people that might have done Metcalf, might not have been North Koreans. I think that unlikely, but it could have been one of these Islamic terror groups, operating on their behalf.
Let me ask you a final question before we run out of time. Okay, we have the Islamic infiltration of the USA coming in over the border with no border security. We have the Metcalf dry run. We have stories about Russian hackers probing multiple U.S. utilities. We have the Russian shipping container launching platform that's being sold to various nations. We have Iran that's been testing its ability to carry out an E.M.P. We have the North Korean capability. When you put this all together, are you concerned that what we really are facing is a simultaneous multi-pronged attack on the USA by a variety of players?
Yes, I am. And let me add two more data points. In July, after the nuclear crisis with North Korea and after the KSM-3 satellite, the Cheongnon gang, which is a North Korean tramp steamer, showed up in the Gulf of Mexico with two SA-2 nuclear-capable missiles. Now it didn't have nuclear warheads on it, but these missiles were capable, if they were armed with nukes, of doing an E.M.P. attack, an anonymous E.M.P. attack by launching from a ship. And they were on their launchers. They were hidden under 10,000 bags of sugar on their launchers. The only reason we know that is because it was almost like the North Koreans were trying to see just how much they could get away with. They came in from the Atlantic side, went up through the Gulf of Mexico, so they were already in the location which is the nightmare scenario from the E.M.P. Commission's standpoint, where the ship could have, if they had wanted to, if they had nukes on those things, done the E.M.P. attack. And then they tried to leave the Caribbean by going through the Panama Canal, almost as if to say, well, we've gotten this far, and the United States hasn't known anything about it. Could we actually get through the Panama Canal, and these guys still not know about it? Now, fortunately, we did discover the missiles when they tried to get through the Panama Canal. And then after that, in October of last year, just a few days before Halloween, a terrorist drug cartel, the Knights Templars, they blacked out a whole province in Mexico. 420,000 people went into the dark so that they could go into the towns and villages and drag out leaders who were opposed to the drug trade and execute them in the public square. So when the Neanderthals, like the Knights Templars, have figured out, that you can use the electric grid as a major societal vulnerability, clearly Al-Qaeda, Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, North Korea, Russia, China, what have they got planned for us? And yeah, I do. I think that these groups have a tacit alliance under the theory that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. They all have different ideological and geostrategic goals, but they all see us as the primary obstacle to achieving those goals. And they'll worry about fighting each other after they've taken us down. And, it's just a question of time. I think that they are experimenting. I think Yemen was the sort of the equivalent of, what's going on now with these various dry run attacks on electric grids and computer hacking and moving around nuclear-capable missiles and orbiting satellites. It's sort of what the Nazis did in Spain before World War II, where they experimented with the Blitzkrieg to see if they could make it work, if they could do this combined arm operation and work out all the kinks and do it in such a way that the West was asleep to it. So we're sort of going through the 1936, 1937 period, where they're getting ready. And things are happening on a much faster timeline.
Well, that reminds me of an earlier conversation I had with Colonel Luna going back to 1999 when he came to visit us, and I was concerned then about a surprise attack on the United States. And he said, Rick, listen, Russia's not going to wake up. The Russian leaders aren't going to wake up one day and say, let's nuke the USA today. He said it will be a carefully planned attack. And he said what you have to watch for are all of the signs for the preparation of the attack. And he enumerated a number of strategic things that would have to take place. And he said, when you see these things happening, then you know the plans for the attack are underway. And he said, but don't be concerned about just a sudden attack because somebody's in a bad mood one day. That's not the way it is. He said, you're going to see a series of things carried out that will clearly tell you that an attack is coming. Hey, let me tell you a true story. We got a phone call here at the office about a month ago from a gentleman that I've known for about 15 years. Now, I've not talked to him personally for a number of years, but I've been aware of him. And he has been in the emergency preparedness business for several decades. He called to inform us that the U.S. government had placed a massive order for emergency food supplies through his company, and he said that he talked to a government official whose name was on the purchase order, and he asked the man, why is the federal government buying all this food? And this is what the man said to him. He said, all I can say to you is that when it goes off, it will not come back on. And I found that to be a very interesting statement because I think it's very obvious that the it is the power grid. All right, my guest today, Dr. Peter Vincent Pry, Executive Director of the Task Force on National and Homeland Security and the author of the books Apocalypse Unknown and Electric Armageddon. Dr. Pry, thank you for being on True News.
Thank you so much for having me on to talk about this esoteric but vitally important subject.
Yes, sir. Well, you're listening to True News. Coming up in the next segment, law professor Frank Buckley will be here to talk about why he thinks Barack Obama may be an imperial president, a king president here in the United States of America. I'll be back in 1 minute.
You're listening to True News, the end-time newscast. Rick will return after this announcement.
Do you need a relationship that won't fail you? Find one that will exceed all your expectations in today's Moment with Charles Stanley.
God wants us to have a relationship with Him. And you see, while we're limited to the degree to which we can love and be transparent and open ourselves, there are no limitations on the other side of that relationship. That is, there are no limitations on what God is willing to show us, willing to teach us, and willing to cause us to feel. And this same holy, righteous, transcendent, sovereign, omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, all gracious, loving, kind God says, above everything else in your life, more important than your preaching, my pastor friends, more important than your singing, all of our musicians, more important than our sharing our faith, more important than serving God in any fashion, God's greatest desire for your life and my life is that we have an intimate relationship with Him.
And the only way to begin such a relationship is by trusting Jesus Christ to forgive your debt of sin. Learn more when you click All Things Are New at intouch.org.
Welcome back to segment 3 of True News for Monday, June 23rd, 2014. I'm Rick Wiles. If the IRS demanded that you supply the agency with your financial records, would you dare tell the IRS that your files were deleted, the hard drives destroyed, and thrown in the trash? Well, that's precisely what the IRS told the U.S. Congress and the American people recently regarding the tens of thousands of emails requested by a U.S. House committee that is investigating the accusation that high-level IRS officials supervised a coordinated operation to harass and intimidate conservative organizations and individuals who oppose the policies of the Obama administration. Last week, I mentioned that Richard Nixon was forced to resign over the public uproar that resulted when it was made known that his personal secretary, Rosemary Woods, erased 18 minutes of President Nixon's conversations that had been recorded in the White House. For our listeners too young to remember the Watergate scandal, the idea that the President of the United States and his top aides would knowingly violate the nation's laws, lie to investigators, and cover up evidence of the crimes was so unthinkable in 1974 that all of the major TV networks interrupted regularly scheduled programming all day long, 5 days a week, for months and months and months to fully inform the public about the looming constitutional crisis. In 2014, we have a president who arbitrarily amends laws or orders federal agencies not to enforce laws. Yet the establishment news media, the Congress, and the public shows no outrage over the behavior of the nation's chief executive. What has happened in America since the 1974 resignation of Richard Nixon? Has the President of the United States become a king? Law professor Francis Buckley is concerned that the United States is transitioning into what he calls a crowning government. He is the Foundation Professor of Law at George Mason University. Professor Buckley is also the author of numerous books on topics such as the rule of law, corporate governance, and the theory of business contracts. His newest book is The Once and Future King, The Rise of Crown Government in America. Professor Buckley, welcome to True News.
Rick, it's great to be with you.
Yes, sir. Okay, why was there shock over Richard Nixon's behavior, but a collective yawn over Barack Obama's behavior?
Well, I guess there maybe are two answers. The first is it's whose ox that gets gored. I mean, Richard Nixon was a Republican, and maybe that's the only important difference. But maybe also we were a different country back then. I tend to think we were. I tend to think that we've changed a lot for a whole bunch of reasons. And for the most part, we've changed our Constitution in consequence. We had a Constitution of separation of powers, and now we seem to be moving to a Constitution of king-like government.
Give us some examples.
Well, there are plenty of them, but here's one that I'll mention two. The DREAM Act, first of all, the idea to bring in, to regularize a large number of undocumented aliens, young kids. Congress didn't want to pass the law, so basically Obama did it by himself through executive order. He designed a program by executive order, and he declined to enforce the immigration laws. So there's that. Here's another one. I'll mention one more. The TARP Act, which, and I never hear the words too big to fail without being physically ill, was designed to bail out financial institutions. But of the $800 billion, $80 billion went to car manufacturers. They weren't financial institutions. And there's nothing more central to the Constitution than the idea that you can't spend money unless Congress appropriates it. Well, that was so 18th century. That doesn't seem to matter much anymore. So we've got what George Mason called an elective monarchy. It's not the same thing as a hereditary monarchy, but it's a monarchy where you get elected and then you do pretty much what you want, it seems.
Barack Obama made a reference in his first inaugural speech in 2009. He referred to outdated concepts about the Constitution. And very few people caught those words. But it was very scary to me when I heard him say it on Inauguration Day. He clearly thinks that the Constitution is outdated.
Yeah, we didn't know quite what he meant at the time. Unless we read his background, in which case we were pretty well prepared for it. But I don't think people had fully worked it out in their own minds. And what has happened was our idea of the Constitution, which is a separation of powers, Congress has a role, President has a role, that seems to have disappeared, and the separation of powers is now a tool that serves to immunize the President from criticism, and Congress is sort of a bit player. And if that's the case, you look at the Constitution, and there's almost nothing left except one little sentence, which says the President has to stand for election every 4 years.
About a week ago, he gave a speech to gay, lesbian, transgendered activists in which he bragged that his administration ceased defending and enforcing the Defense of Marriage Act. And to me, regardless of what your view is on that topic, the fact that the President of the United States said, I instructed the Justice Department not to enforce a federal law, that in itself is shocking, regardless of what the law is.
Well, there's something, to my mind, even a little more curious, and that is that the Supreme Court ended up backing him on that issue in the Windsor case. Mm-hmm. So maybe that's a case where the Supreme Court had his back on that one issue. But, in the last day, he wrote an executive order to the effect that transgendered people should be protected from discrimination by all federal contractors, which is, pretty much taking it national.
Why is the U.S.
I think part of that, by the way, is simply an attack on religion.
Mm-hmm.
The Germans called this a culture camp when Bismarck did it 100 years ago and more. And right now, I guess there's a constituency of people in the United States who just like the idea of bashing religion. And we always thought we were different from other countries in that respect. We thought, the French do that, but we don't do that. But I find it really remarkable that this is happening right now. When you get sued by the Little Sisters of the Poor, something's weird.
I agree. Yeah. And the guy's getting away with it.
Well, the Supreme Court may stop him on that one, but in general, it seems to be a political winner. I don't think these guys are fools. I think if they do it, they think there's a constituency, and what that means is the battle lines are drawn between members of the voting public.
Why has the response from the U.S. Congress been so anemic?
Well, I tell you, in corporate law, there's this thing called the business judgment rule, and roughly the way it goes is you don't tell a businessman how to make money. And there's a political equivalent, the political judgment rule. And the idea here is you don't tell a politician how to get votes. So I don't like John Boehner too much. For me, he kind of looks like a puppy dog that lies on his back and wiggles his hands, his paws, and waits for a presidential tummy rub. But then again, he's got skin in the game, and I don't, Boehner. Mm-hmm. So I guess he's weighing the votes. And in cases where Obama is acting unconstitutionally, number one, it's often the case that many people agree with him. And number two, there is no voting constituency for the separation of powers. I mean, it's just, I'll tell you something. I heard some people on NPR, or I don't know, maybe it was Fox News, the other day talking about Obama's stretch, his reach, his expansion of presidential powers. And one guy said, well, more or less, what do you expect? Congress doesn't pass his legislation, so he has to do it. Where was that guy when they studied constitutional law?
I hope he wasn't teaching it.
Maybe.
But Obama,
but that's shocking, really.
But Obama passes himself off as a constitutional law professor.
Well, that's just a joke. I mean, he was not a professor. He was a lecturer. He never went to workshops at the university. I was at the University of Chicago. I didn't overlap with him, but he never went to workshops. He never went to faculty meetings. He'd just drop in. He wasn't a very good colleague. He wasn't a very friendly guy. He'd come in and he'd talk about his views of the Constitution, and he was mostly just talking about things like empathy and feelings and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Had you met him at the university?
No, we didn't overlap. I mean, I know people who did overlap, and they would tell you, I don't know where people got the idea he's such a genius, is roughly what they tell me. And he was certainly not an amiable guy. He was a pretty arrogant guy.
Still is.
Oh yeah.
Today.
Yeah. It's well, it's not frightening that there are people like that. There always have been people like that. What's frightening about America today is they get votes. I mean, people vote for them.
How has the presidency changed since the days of George Washington?
Well, Washington was the greatest and the indispensable man. And George III said he's the greatest man in the world. Why? Because in 1783 he had the opportunity to become king, and he turned it down. And now Obama is the most consequential president since Washington because he has the opportunity to become something like a king, and he's taking it. But Washington, I mean, what made Washington heroic was, his consciousness of Republican virtue and the idea that he didn't want to exploit every possible opportunity, and he had a sense for the good of the country as a whole, as expressed in the Constitution. And the framers that was really the greatest generation. And if you read their debates, you'll just be blown away at how wise they were. They weren't really theoreticians or philosophers. They were practical men of good judgment and decent, honest people.
Did they
were struggling with the idea of how to structure a government to promote liberty.
As they crafted the framework of the new republic, did they fear that the presidency could become an elected monarch?
Absolutely right, and I think that was the basic fear. I think that was the touchstone of the Constitution. Scholars will look at the Constitution and they'll come out with different stories, and some people will say, well, it's really all about the separation of powers. But as I read it, there's something more basic, and that is a fear of a presidency accumulating all the powers, George Mason's elected monarch. And they tried in various ways, but they never figured. They just didn't predict where we'd be 100 or 200 years later. They didn't predict the rise of democracy. They thought, in nearly all cases, the choice of president would go to the House of Representatives. If you look at the Constitution, if a majority of the Electoral College can't agree on a candidate, it gets kicked over to the House, voting by state. And the framers thought that's going to happen all the time because after Washington, we'll never have national candidates. But the last time it was kicked over to the House was 1824. And so we have things they didn't anticipate: a broad democracy, national candidates, a national media. To say that they didn't predict that is only to say that they weren't omniscient.
Another common view today is the Founding Fathers wanted all three branches of the federal government to be equal in power and importance. Is that correct?
That's just wrong.
They didn't?
No, certainly not. The third branch, and I honor the federal bench for the most part. I mean, the federal judges are, and I know a lot of them, are often really great, humble, wise people. But they never thought that, the framers never thought that the courts would be all that involved in governance. They thought they'd have a very modest role. They didn't predict anything like our present court, going around making laws willy-nilly, it seems at times. No, they thought mostly it would be congressional government. They thought that the president would be like somebody who opens up an IKEA box, with instructions on how to build a table, and he puts it together. And the legislation would be like the instructions in the IKEA box, and the president would have very little discretion. He just followed the orders. So they thought that maybe apart from being the commander-in-chief, the president, all you need is somebody of good integrity, somebody who's honest, competent in carrying out orders, basically a very skilled agent of Congress. That was, that was the idea current at the time, and boy, it's completely reversed now.
Has the constitutional republic been damaged to such an extent that it cannot be repaired?
Well, I never want to bet against the home team, so I'd like to put my faith in Americans and American voters to react to this. But like we said right at the beginning, it's not the same country, I think, as it was in Richard Nixon's day. It's been changed by a whole variety of things. Immigration is one of them. A broken educational system that doesn't teach anything about the Constitution is another. With the result that we don't have the instinctive feel, I think, that we once did about outrageous behavior by a president.
And I think the original Tea Party movement represented an awakening by conservative, patriotic citizens who cherished the country's founding, and they woke up one day and realized they were in the minority.
I agree entirely. I honor the Tea Party people. I'm here in Washington, and they've been up here from time to time, and a nicer, neater group of people you'd never find. I mean, they come up here and they pick up their trash, and they're just good folks. And if there is any movement which would serve to correct the pathologies I'm describing, it would be the Tea Party movement.
The U.S. Congress now appears to be the weakest of the three branches, and I think there's a number of reasons to explain it. My one concern is that we've entered a state where the intelligence agencies have collected so much information about every member of Congress that they are paralyzed. They're terrified to challenge whatever shadow group is running this country.
That's an interesting suggestion. I hadn't thought of that. They've certainly collected a lot of information, and as you know, the data mining of voters was crucially important in the 2012 election. I mean, the Democrats knew one's computer purchases, your Chargex card and what you subscribe to, and when they sent people out to lobby door to door, they knew exactly which address to go to. They knew exactly whom the waivers were. And that's changing the nature of, and of course Republicans were, as always, one step behind in all of this. So now, imagine all this information is collected in Washington, and it's held by, some corrupt people in in the IRS and throughout the U.S. government, and it's being used to bolster the presidency. I mean, one should be really frightened by the abuses of the IRS, and even more so of the criminal justice establishment and the Department of Justice and so on. Here's one thing I found really, really shocking, and I'm sure you'll remember it. In the middle of the 2012 campaign, a campaign manager for Obama suggested that Obama was a felon. And the offense in question was some really obscure Securities and Exchange Commission rule. But as always, there's a criminal penalty attached, and they don't require criminal intent. So you can fall into the trap of being a felon without even noticing, what you've done. So at that point, it's just a question of will they charge you or not. And when they charge you in this country, you know what your chances are of escaping scot-free? It's 0.5%. So once
you're indicted,
once they go
convicted.
After you, yeah, it's just almost impossible to get out. By the way, by comparison, in Canada, you have a 40% chance, and here it's less than 1%.
Which explains Dinesh D'Souza's result.
Exactly.
Most likely he's going to go to prison.
Well, he pleaded, and it's a felony. And, he might. And of course, what he did was he made an I guess it was a Hillary movie this time.
Mm-hmm.
And, we're not Russia, but we sure as heck ain't New Zealand.
And I'm personally dealing.
That is really the warning sign. When you criminalize Republican politics, that's sort of the last barrier.
The book is let me find this. I got to fix this. Okay, the book is The Once and Future King. I'll do this again. All right. The book is The Once and Future King: The Rise of Crown Government in America. The author is law professor Francis Buckley. Frank, thank you so much. Appreciate you being here on True News.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great.
Okay, if you're listening to me right now on shortwave radio, frequencies 5850 or 7455, Dan Duvall's coming up next. Dan, who's your guest today?
Today on Revelation Ready, Doug Woodward is joining us to get into Bible prophecy. We will be talking about his perspective of the blood moon tetrad we are currently in. We will be getting into the question of why we address Bible prophecy and a real meaning of the word apocalypse. We will also touch on the subject of glory and kingdom. It's going to be an exciting discussion that people won't want to miss. All this tonight on Revelation Ready. Thanks, Rick.
Okay, Dan. Appreciate all that you're doing for us here at True News. Dan's got a great program. You got to tune in and listen. We need your support. We're in the last week of the month of June, and we could use a B12 booster shot to our finances. We've taken on a lot this year, and we really need more partners to join with us. We've got a wonderful group of partners who help us out every single month, but our expenses have really jumped much higher in 2014 because we're taking on so many more projects, such as 12 hours of nightly broadcasting on 2 international shortwave stations. So, if you haven't signed up yet as a True News supporter, why don't you do it this week? We need to hear from you in June. Go to TrueNews.com, TRUNEWS, TrueNews.com, at PayPal. Use support@TrueNews.com, or just drop a check or money order in the mail. God bless you. I'll see you tomorrow.